Welcome to episode 19 of Ping, a Firewalls.com podcast, a bi-weekly look at cybersecurity, including interviews, news, expert tips, and the latest trends. I'm Kevin Baxter, and I'm joined by my Firewalls.com colleague, Andrew Harmon.
Hi there.
Hey, Andrew. As we tackle a different featured topic each episode. New episodes are out every other Wednesday, so subscribe or follow on your favorite podcasting platform to get the latest first. Ratings and reviews are appreciated, and you can drop us a line anytime at podcast@firewalls.com. As always, thanks for listening, and now it's time to get into our featured topic for this episode.
On each episode of Ping, we cover a few topics in the cybersecurity world, citing recent headlines from the news and giving a little background discussion on them. From high-profile breaches to smart toilets, from botnets to attack speakers, from Black Friday to, of course, the latest COVID-19 scams, there's been plenty to talk about in the cyber news world. So seeing as how we've been podcasting here at Ping for about 9 months now, it seems like our due date has come to take a look back at a few past stories that we've covered and see where things stand. A sort of where are they now for subjects whose stories were either still developing at the time or maybe just make sense to update later. And don't worry, we've still got a regular headlight segment coming up shortly as well.
So for update number 1, way back on episode 1 of Ping, we covered a story in Wired about hackers turning some smart speakers into real-life weapons, forcing them to emit dangerous sound waves that could actually injure people.
A cybersecurity researcher has found that custom malware could be used to get speakers to emit either inaudible or audible frequencies that could harm hearing, cause tinnitus, or even lead to psychological effects.
And when we're talking about speakers, we're talking about things like laptop speakers, USB speakers, Bluetooth speakers, smart speakers such as the Google Home or Amazon Alexa.
It would be the first of many stories about security flaws in Internet of Things or IoT devices. So where does IoT security stand now? Problem solved? Not exactly. But the dangers of unsecured IoT devices are pretty well recognized now, and that does mean experts are hard at work to find ways to better protect both the individual devices and, by proxy, the networks that they're on. So a few updates here related to this subject matter. First off, the IoT security marketplace is projected to grow at a pace of about 33% a year through 2025. And it does need to, with billions of devices out there, and conservatively, at least half of them vulnerable to attack. Secondly, Microsoft's Azure Sphere is a sort of IoT ecosystem, hosting connected devices and their related cloud services. Just recently, Microsoft offered a bounty of $100,000 to hackers who can break into this space. So they're looking for any vulnerabilities there that can be exploited. And third, the government is getting involved to try to set security standards for IoT manufacturers that previously did not exist. California passed the IoT Cybersecurity Improvement Act of 2019, and at the federal level, Senator Mark Warner just sent a letter urging some top device manufacturers to ensure what they make is not easily exploitable. So lots and lots of action taking place in the IoT security sphere.
That's true. You talked about IoT security a lot and gave a lot of those warnings as far as how many devices are out there these days, and as far as the supply chain for parts not being exactly the most secure process. But I think this story with the government getting involved and Microsoft Azure out there, and as you said, that the IoT security space growing as a marketplace, I'd like to think our warnings were heard. We Ping the podcast finally did something right. Single-handedly spurred the advance of IoT security, I believe.
We have been beating the IoT security drum quite a bit. The smart speakers story with the acoustic cyber weapon situation was just the beginning. We've definitely had our share of IoT vulnerabilities that we have discussed, and we've talked about it with some of our guests as well. I know Ryan Orsi, a couple of months back in one of our episodes, was talking about just this thing when we were talking about wireless standards. He was also talking about the fact that IoT devices did not have any of those standards out there that they're trying to push on the wireless world as well. So this is definitely a push that's been happening for a while. And in many of the stories that we've done regarding IoT security, the experts are all saying that as much as you can do on the end user level, on the network admin level, it still really starts with the manufacturers taking IoT security seriously.
Right, and I think that's exactly why you're starting to see Microsoft Azure spheres, these IoT ecosystems and all the infrastructure behind it cropping up, because businesses are realizing, they are using these Internet of Things devices, and they do have to be secure one way or the other. So if it's not going to come in the form of onboard security on the device, then they're going to have to start turning to these people. So I know a few manufacturers that we work with have started offering virtual firewalls specifically in these cloud spaces such as Azure and AWS. So they're definitely turning a lot of attention to that space.
Yeah, a lot of established cybersecurity companies and even some new ones popping up are focusing a lot of efforts on IoT security because, as we said, it's not going away. People, the IoT devices are already ubiquitous as it is, but they're just going to continue heading that direction for the foreseeable future, and there's really no reason to think that it's going away at all. It's just the people whose houses are not as smart as the other people's houses are probably going to slowly get there. Maybe even out of necessity over the course of the next several years. So, more and more devices that people use on a day-to-day basis are going to have those smart features that are just appealing enough that draw even more people into the sphere.
Right. And so speaking of that IoT security marketplace, one area that I personally have noticed a big growth in IoT security is a lot of companies out there putting out EDR products, so endpoint detection and response, and that does extend in most cases to IoT devices. So as EDR becomes more and more popular and commonplace in the market, I imagine IoT being under that umbrella will become a norm as well.
Absolutely. So just another area where IoT devices are gaining some level of security, and it'll really be interesting, though, to follow how the device manufacturers themselves sort of get policed, because it's one thing to set these standards. California passed that law back at the end of 2019, and then this letter that we talked about in this story just actually went out very recently, but the letter doesn't really have any teeth behind it. It's just an urge from a U.S. senator. It'll be interesting to see if standards do get passed, if they get passed in, as a nation at some point, worldwide at some point, that people really feel the need to adopt completely. And then how is that policed in terms of the devices that are out there on the market for sale? Because there are so many IoT makers. Some of them are the big, major companies that would probably fall into line, but then there are a lot of secondary companies that have sort of knockoff versions of the nicest stuff. And I'm curious how that would be policed if we get to that point.
Right. And I think this is a matter of, when, not if, like we talked about in the WatchGuard wireless episode. It's kind of a matter of, people are going to start adopting these standards, whether it's on the government end or the private industry end, but it's going to be a matter of, how many infections and so forth are going to happen before those standards are put in place. So hopefully it'll be sooner rather than later. So that first update is a bit more of a general story, but for number 2, we're going to get more specific, go back to an old, I guess this is a bit of a cyber crime thriller story maybe unfolding, or maybe just completely legit. But on episode 9, we discussed a story of the Bitcoin exchange called Quadriga, and specifically its founder, Jerome Cotton, who reportedly died under mysterious circumstances in India early last year, leaving $145 million either gone or in limbo, as he was the only one who had private keys to access it. Our story was about lawyers of investors in the company wanting Cotton's body exhumed in Canada to prove that he hadn't faked his own death.
The law firm not only wants to confirm that he did in fact die, they also want to confirm the cause of death.
Right. So basically what's happened with this money, it's stored in a offline status known as a cold wallet, which only the CEO had access to. So
yes,
with
only
his
the
passing,
CEO.
only the CEO, only the man in question here. So with his passing, all of those cold wallets and $145 million worth of other people's money has vanished.
So that story was back in September, and a big update is that there's not really a big update yet. Courts have challenged, court challenges have continued, but so far no resolution to the exhumation request or the $145 million missing Bitcoin wallet. And the most recent story from about a month ago simply involves the Canadian Revenue Agency, or the Canadian version of the IRS, getting access to Quadriga user information, about 115,000 users total, and about 750,000 documents. So theoretically, this could help speed up future distribution of funds if that becomes possible. But it does also somewhat defeat the privacy and untraceable nature of cryptocurrency if all of these records are being turned over to the government. So at this point, the priority seems to be recovery. Otherwise, the saga continues.
Yeah, this was a twisty tale. The story was back about a year ago, a little over a year ago now, that Mr. Cotton died in India, and there had already been some issues surrounding this cryptocurrency exchange, Quadriga, to begin with. And then that death occurred, reportedly. And so there were suspicions around the cause of death. And then, the big kicker to this is that there's nobody besides him who has a way of accessing this about $145 million. Some reports I've seen have actually had it at $190 million too. So it's a lot of money that people have in there. It's about 115,000 investors that are trying to recover what they have. And just a very interesting tale to see where it goes. But it's also interesting to see that, the government of Canada is still working on this. I'm not really sure what the exact implications are of the Canadian Revenue Association agency, getting this information. I guess theoretically, if they have everyone in there, they could be ready to tax the funds that are distributed, if they ever get to a point where they can distribute them.
Yeah, they definitely want to be the first to know as well.
Yeah.
Right. So Cotton was diagnosed with Crohn's disease at age 24, and I believe he was 30 last year when he passed away. The Fortis Escorts Hospital in Jaipur issued a statement confirming that Cotton was admitted on December 8th at 9:45. So, the hospital seems to say this is a legit story, not a faked his own death to run away with the wallet sort of scheme. Some interesting details have unfolded as they're reviewing his will. So specifically, most of his assets, I believe, total over $9 million or so, were passed on to his now widowed wife. And there wasn't a whole lot else in there apart from, some small things for friends and family specifics. But apparently the wife does not have any access to these passcodes either. So there was some thought that perhaps, she would have the access as well, but she denies having any sort of role in that Bitcoin world or that wallet specifically.
The whole story, especially really regardless of whether there was any shenanigans at play is a real cautionary tale for investors because, and for any other type of a Bitcoin exchange or other types of investment situations. You can't just have one person have the keys to the kingdom, really. And because something can happen to an individual, you have to have some backups in place so that there's a way for people to access the funds in the event of some type of an issue occurring, whether it's a unexpected death or one individual having some sort of becoming the victim of some sort of scheme or anything like that. You need to have some backup situations in place.
Yeah,
so that
I would say at least write it down and put it in a safe. Yeah, that works.
Yeah.
And maybe you lose the code to the safe, so who knows?
But there just has to be. I mean, it's very irresponsible to have something set up where only one person has the access, unless the one person is, the only person who has money involved in it. I guess that makes some sense. But if you're hosting funds for 115,000 investors, and it's all based on one person being able to get in there to let the money back out, then there's a problem there, regardless of whether there was anything nefarious taking place here. And I think, I'm sure that part of it is the investors are just trying to explore any avenue that they possibly can to find a way to get this money back. And the conspiracy theory of a faked death is certainly a sexy story. But
yeah, it's more appealing than admitting you effed up. Well, there's one thing that is not a doubt in anybody's mind is somehow, some way, this is good for Bitcoin.
Our third update, back on episode 6, we discussed a cyber attack at India's Kundakulam nuclear power plant that was attributed. What was that?
Nailed it.
Thank you. That was attributed to the North Korean-based Lazarus Group. While the plant's critical infrastructure network was not believed to be breached, the D-Track malware found on one of the plant's internal networks can give hackers total control over infected systems.
One of the reactors was shut down for the day. At first, the company denied that this was a cyber attack, and then, as usual, later confirmed that malware had been detected.
And the malware that was detected is known as D-Track, which is a virus that is commonly used by the Lazarus Group, which is why it's being associated with that group.
And so the internal networks affected had user credentials and information about the plant, things of that nature. Since the attack first occurred in October, there have been a couple of updates. First off, investigations revealed the D-Track variant found then may have actually been a second version, as it contained credentials from the plant's network that may have been gathered previously, which suggests that there had been some sort of longer-term presence on this network from the hacker group, with certainly proprietary information being the target here. And while the attack didn't go after operations, as the follow-up story, one follow-up story suggests, even if the attack itself isn't going after the operations side of things and, aiming to cause some sort of a nuclear accident or disaster, it could still affect systems that could set the stage for a problem, potentially disabling some safety systems, causing lost power or something else. And, even just having the intelligence of the plant, even if they weren't getting into the operations side of things, can open the door for some sort of future bigger attack down the road. And also, those nuclear secrets getting into the wrong hands never seems to be a smart idea.
Right. I think that's a very good point you make, that one implication people don't often consider in cybersecurity is what else is going to be a complication from the main attack. So as you said, in the case of this nuclear power plant, perhaps during the course of attack, even if it wasn't an objective or even if they didn't mean to purposely do it, they might have disabled some program that would, be used for safety or other sort of notification system. So there are always those additional complications, additional complications in addition to the main objective of an attack.
Yeah, and even if the malware itself wasn't doing anything, sometimes even getting in there and cleaning it up can cause problems too. So,
right.
Just the fact that you get breached leads to the potential of many unforeseen consequences. And when you're talking about a nuclear facility, that just makes those unforeseen consequences feel a little bit heavier than some places.
So DTrack, the malware used here, is a remote administration tool, a RAT, as they're called, developed by the Lazarus Group, who I believe we mentioned is a North Korean state-sponsored hacking group. Basically, this is a pretty advanced malware that has a versatile range of uses, from downloading files, exfiltrating data, dumping disk volume, all sorts of stuff. Also used in persistent attacks, as you mentioned, that this might be a follow-up from an earlier, more persistent, long-term attack rather than just a one-time smash and grab kind of deal.
Yeah, and it was associated initially in India in particular, and in some other places, with ATM skimming. So that was one of the first uses that we heard about DTrack, but it's been modified, as most malware is modified several times, and can be used for all sorts of types of attacks. And it made its way into this nuclear power plant. So the initial story was back in October. Have not seen any reports of any other attacks on India's nuclear infrastructure, so that's a positive. But also haven't seen a lot of reports saying they've completely nailed down their cybersecurity apparatus since then either.
Right, and I think this operation was likely more of a steal data and proprietary info kind of deal than a sabotage or break things attack. So, like you said, they haven't really announced that everything is good to go yet, but it seems that they have cleaned up what happened.
Yeah, and I think if there was some type of a sabotage situation, they probably would have figured that out by now.
Right.
So yeah, I think it was info gathering and everything, but the question is, if they had already been in the system for a while before that, are they still there, finding some more stuff, or biding their time to grab something else off of the network later on? It's certainly possible. And hopefully it's just a cautionary tale. Maybe the information that was taken was not the most top secret stuff, and maybe it's a situation where it does just lead these types of places to lock down their cybersecurity setup a little bit more. But we'll have to keep monitoring this one as well. And so those are just a few of the updates we thought we would share. We do, as Andrew said earlier, cover plenty of stories here on Ping. So if you have another update you're interested in, or if you have something to share about one of these stories, let us know in the comments, or email us at podcast@firewalls.com, and we'll try to get it included in a future episode. And now it's time for headlines. In this regular segment, we discuss a few top news stories in the network security world and what they may mean to you. So we'll go on to headline number 1. GoDaddy hack breaches hosting account credentials. So GoDaddy is the world's largest domain name registrar. I think almost everybody has heard of them. Well, some people might not actually know what GoDaddy was based on watching all those commercials at the Super Bowl over the years. Yes, it is a domain name registrar, but it's warning customers that attackers may have obtained their web hosting account credentials. So this was back in October that the intrusion took place. An unauthorized individual was able to gain access to the user's login details. About 28,000 customers were affected by the attack. So sort of a drop in the bucket of the 19 million customers that GoDaddy has worldwide. But 28,000 is not an insignificant number either.
Right, and GoDaddy does specifically point out that the only accounts affected, or the only account credentials affected, were the actual web hosting accounts that connected to the SSH. These were not other, GoDaddy user accounts. These were just specifically the web hosting credentials.
Right, yeah, the customer information was not compromised here, but still a little bit concerning. The company didn't say how long the attacker had access to these credentials, but they did say that they identified on April 23rd of this year, they identified SSH usernames and passwords had been compromised in their hosting environment. They immediately reset the usernames and passwords, removed an unauthorized SSH file from their platform, and they have no indication that the individual used any of these credentials or modified any customer hosting accounts, and they did not have access to the main GoDaddy accounts, as I said. So that was the statement basically from GoDaddy about this situation.
Right. As you said, the company said they found no evidence of attackers adding or modifying any files impacting account hosting. However, they did advise their customers to go ahead and audit their hosting account, make sure everything does look in order, just in case. But as far as they can tell, nothing was added, changed, removed, or anything like that.
Yeah, and anytime you have a breach occur, even if you're not one of the 28,000 records that may have been seen in an unauthorized manner, always good to go back in and maybe tighten up some account security, change a few things in there, right, just in case.
Yes, and GoDaddy is also providing a free year's service of both Website Security Deluxe and Express Malware Removal. These are basically services that run scans on your websites and look for any potential security vulnerabilities, raises alarms if anything looks as if it's been affected, and you can then address that with these tools.
Yeah, and so the SSH file that we talked about, SSH is normally used to log into a remote machine and execute commands. It also can be used to transfer files using SFTP or STP protocols. So that was the SSH part of that statement that GoDaddy released. But it is interesting that the account breach occurred in October, and they clearly said that they didn't knock it out until April, when they found they got rid of the file and discovered the attack. So you've got to think that there was access there for somebody for probably the entire period of time from October through April.
2019 seems like it was not a great year for GoDaddy in general in terms of some of these security issues. So in 2019, it was discovered that scammers had compromised hundreds of GoDaddy accounts to create subdomains, like for URL squatting, fake landing pages that impersonate popular websites that are meant to redirect potential victims to spam pages or malware or other sorts of traps. And then earlier in 2019, it was found that GoDaddy themselves had been injecting JavaScript into customer websites without their knowledge. So Hopefully 2020 will be a better year for them.
Right, because it's a better year for all of us so far, at least.
Yes.
Right? Maybe. GoDaddy also actually had some high-level configuration information for tens of thousands of systems, and sensitive pricing options for running those systems had come out in Amazon AWS back in 2018 because of a cloud storage misconfiguration as well. So yeah, they don't have the cleanest track record over the last couple of years, but hopefully things will get better there. I don't know if they have any celebrity endorsers anymore. I don't think Danica Patrick works for them anymore, but
I might have a suggestion for them.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, you could get Alanis Morissette. You live, you learn. You lose, you learn.
On to headline number 2. Samsung patches zero-click vulnerability impacting all smartphones sold since 2014. Seems like a pretty large number of phones since 2014 for Samsung, right?
In Apple terms, that's about 100 years.
So security vulnerability was found and patch released just recently by Samsung to fix said vulnerability impacting all of their smartphones sold since 2014. It resides in how the Android OS flavor running on Samsung devices handles the custom image format called with the file extension .qmg, which Samsung started supporting on all its smartphones released since late 2014. So that's almost 6 years of smartphones, and Samsung is a fairly popular smartphone maker.
Yeah, this story kind of took me by surprise because when you open up this story, the headline image is actually the image of a phone I had for several years. So I remember carrying it in my pocket many times.
Yeah. So the vulnerability was found by a member of the Project Zero bug hunting team of Google. We've talked about them finding some vulnerabilities before as well. They discovered a way to exploit how Skia, the Android graphics library, handles these QMage images sent to a device. And I think the scariest thing about this is, we talk about a lot of malware that, infects your devices, infects your computer by you clicking on an attachment or going to a questionable website, something like that. This one is called a zero-click vulnerability. So it can get right onto your system with no action taking place on your end at all. That means it just happens and you can do nothing about it.
Yeah, that's a pretty scary prospect. In this particular case, the way that was done is research sent a series of text messages to a phone, SMS messages, which basically pinged and tried to find out where the images were being sent to, trying to find the location of this Skia library on the Android phone's memory. And then once that location was identified, they could then send one of these no-click attacks through, which would execute an attacks code on that device without, as you said, any input from the user whatsoever. To go a step further, even researchers who pulled this off found a way to do it without triggering any notification sounds on the phone. So it could be that this is happening without your knowledge, and then you pick up your phone and, well, too late. So
yeah. And, people don't just use their phones for fun anymore. There's lots of important stuff on your phones most of the time. I think almost everyone does some online shopping, maybe has payment set up with their phone, all sorts of things like that. So any kind of vulnerability that, can happen on your phone seems to be something that could have some pretty major implications for someone's privacy and for sensitive account info as well.
Right. So, as I said, it was SMS messages that were used to do this attack. However, there are plenty of other apps and services on an Android that make use of this cute image in the Skia library. So, that's not the only way that this vulnerability could exist. There might be quite a few other ways to exploit this.
Yeah, so the discovery of the vulnerability occurred in February by, again, Google's Project Zero. It was reported to Samsung. The bug was patched just in its May security updates. And, one thing to keep in mind is depending on how you get your security updates, sometimes those don't actually get to users that quickly, because a security update from Samsung may go through Verizon, T-Mobile, AT&T, whatever your provider is, and a lot of these cell phone services kind of smush everything into their own updates and don't do those right away. So hopefully those updates are getting out pretty quickly. And if you do get an alert on your Samsung device to do an update, don't snooze that one. Just make sure you get that update on there as soon as possible.
Right. So a little bit more on Google Project Zero's team that discovered this. As you said, they made Samsung aware of this in February, and Samsung issued a patch in May 2020. Project Zero says that 97.7% of companies that are told about these patches 97.7% of companies that are told about these vulnerabilities issue patches within 90 days after being told. So it does seem like not only is this team very good at finding things, it is actually translating to these companies very quickly and efficiently, addressing their findings.
Yeah, it says actually that Project Zero has been really focused on the zero-click attack surface as well, and they've disclosed 14 zero-click bugs in Image.io also, which was Apple's image parsing framework. This particular one, though, Samsung is certainly not the only Android phone out there, but they are apparently the only ones who have made this modification that causes the vulnerability. So no other Android phones are supposedly affected by this particular issue.
Good. Yeah, the Project Zero folks are kind of like a little team of superheroes, which here's a little fun fact. The head of that team's name is Chris Evans, shares it with the actor who plays Captain America. So
shares his name.
I'm sure there's a lot of Avengers posters in their office.
Well, he's pretty talented, Chris Evans. So it's possible he does both.
That could be.
On to headline number 3, cybersecurity and COVID-19, the first 100 days. So we've talked since the pandemic became front and center in the news. We've talked about a lot of issues relating to this. And Mimecast actually has done a report on the first 100 days of COVID-19 and cybersecurity. In this case, they're using January through March as their first 100 days. Certainly the 100 days thing sort of depends on your perspective, but a couple of the highlights or lowlights depending on your perspective here. Spam and opportunistic detections were up more than 25%. Impersonation was up about 30%. Malware up 35%. So overall, nefarious online activity up about a third during the time of the coronavirus since this tracking has begun.
I think that makes sense. We've talked about this a lot in past episodes that hackers love a good story to latch on to. They like a big world social scenario just like this to sort of build their scams around. And what else is anybody talking about right now if not COVID-19?
And it being a health issue and things of that nature, people are antsy about it to begin with. So if they see see things that look to be legitimate in terms of providing some sort of advice or vaccine information or something from a government organization, they would be even more inclined, I would think, to click on something than they would be with some of the more casual types of situations that hackers sometimes use.
Right. And this certainly checks all the correct boxes to meet those social engineering guidelines as far as getting a successful attack out there. I believe we mentioned that there were attacks on the World Health Organization in previous episodes, and apparently similar emails are now doing the rounds that are more professional, more higher grade looking and more efficient. So it seems like this is an area not only are hackers going to target, they're going to actually, start practicing and increasing how much effort and time and professionalism they're going to put into this.
Yeah, and I think that goes back with some things that we've talked about on previous episodes too, with the fact that things are more targeted. There's a little bit more of a desire to make things stick in a better way. It's not just spread your malware everywhere and hope for something. There's definitely more of an intentionality behind attacks now, and people are spending the extra time to try to make things look more legitimate and try to find people who would be especially willing to click on something that they probably shouldn't.
Mm-hmm. One quote that I'll read out here: "Some will reflect that additional move of more traditional crime to be partly or wholly carried out online, which adds additional volume." So basically, I think what he's saying here is everybody's on lockdown, including the criminals. And so a lot of criminal organizations will likely be shifting their own operations to the web, adding, more volume of cyber attacks. In addition to just having this social engineering hook, as we said. So there's a lot of factors at play here that's putting a lot of strain on cybersecurity industries and cybersecurity admins.
Absolutely. And, speaking of cybersecurity admins, one of the other reasons that's mentioned here that the attacks are increasing during this period is also the amount of potential vulnerability out there because of the remote workforce. So we've had several discussions about work from home and remote work security recently. And the bottom line is, we know that there are more vulnerabilities when people are spread out and working all over the place, as opposed to cozy behind the confines of a workplace network. And, the hackers know that too. So they are certainly taking advantage of that fact.
Yeah, it's very easy to let your guard down when you're sitting in a very, comfortable home office. You've got your own laptop nearby, I'm sure, and you're kind of used to doing things a certain way at home, and you don't really have that same mindset that you would carry with you in an office space anymore.
Yeah, and you might not have the security setup that you have in the office as well. Not every company has the ability to put out endpoint products that are administered by the network and keep all their devices on lockdown when they leave. And some people are just using their own devices instead. So all sorts of potential vulnerabilities there, and those are certainly being taken advantage of. And you mentioned the WHO scam looking more official. They're also timed pretty well to match situations where people would be more likely to click. So the WHO scam that you talked about went out when the UK and Australia locked down in late March, a very specific one looking like it came from the World Health Organization. So people would definitely be more likely to look for guidance at that point.
Right. It's all a game of, what's urgent at the moment, what fears you're playing to. And obviously everything's sort of a perfect storm right now for people that are craving information. And there's a lot of, like you said, issues of timing. And these domains and website spoofings are probably just going to continue increasing. And it's up to end users to continue to double check the links before they click them, double check the sender, make sure everything looks legit before you take any action.
Yeah, and some of the most targeted organizations or used organizations for these types of attacks in this 100-day period, charities, obviously we talked about the World Health Organization too, and then retail and manufacturing are noted as prime targets here. And, the authors of the report, Mimecast, they're warning that targets will continue to evolve and that vigilance needs to continue among companies, among organizations, and of course, among users as well.
Yeah, actually, one last interesting tidbit that's pointed out here is that Mimecast has warned companies to be vigilant specifically when communicating with third parties and suppliers that they may work with in the past. The idea being that as businesses potentially close or, fold in the coming months due to this virus, that criminals might get their hands on client lists or things like that and try to impersonate these closing companies in the following months and try to make off with some of their customers' data before they disappear.
It's just a time for increased vigilance, and I know there are plenty of things on everyone's mind right now, but it's very important to keep cybersecurity in mind too, because a successful attack now may have even greater implications to long-term sustainability than before. Thanks very much for joining us on this episode of Ping, a Firewalls.com podcast. Check out the links in the description to get more info about everything we discussed. And please do visit our blog at firewalls.com/blog. Subscribe or follow now to ensure you get the latest episodes as soon as they're available. And please do rate and review us wherever you listen to the podcast. Visit firewalls.com for all your network security needs and give us a follow on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. For Andrew Harmon, I'm Kevin Baxter. We'll be back soon with another episode, but in the meantime, we remind you to
get secure,
secure,
stay secure.